Why are you frazzled?
Oh, I was at a friend's house in Amersham yesterday and I drank far too much wine. So I didn't get much sleep.
Having got to know you a little bit over the last sort of 6 months, it feels a little bit like this is often a recurring theme.
um, yes. Do you know what? I've sort of realized that my kind of tolerance of alcohol is, well, no, actually, it's very high. I can function on it, but increasingly the next day I feel absolutely appalling. So I've sort of realized that over the next 2 years, I'm going to have to wean myself down to become one of those people who's quite happy to sit there with like one, maybe two glasses of wine in a sort of party atmosphere. It's just not really happening at the moment. But
Do you like soft drinks?
I drink quite a lot of fizzy water.
Ooh.
I like drinks that I'm not very good at just drinking water and really boring things. They often have to have loads of sugar in them. I
Yeah.
even drink peppermint tea with sugar in it, which appalls some people, but
This is some top indie rock content, isn't it? What soft drinks Mickey from Lush likes. I am also a bit frazzled because I just watched an episode of The Traitors with my mum.
Don't tell me what happened.
Well, where are you up to?
I've got the last two or three to watch.
All right,
So
you're way ahead of me.
oh,
Way
okay.
ahead. I,
Okay.
we only started it about 2 days ago, so we're only on about episode 3 or 4. But is it the best TV program ever made?
I mean, it's sort of the best and the worst, isn't it? It's sort of kind of just sort of ridiculous, and
Yeah,
everyone is way over the top.
yeah,
I think what I love about it is that it's like when Big Brother first started, it was really right for its time. And
yeah,
I think that this is like in this world where everybody thinks that they're some sort of psychological expert, right? So everybody reads stuff into everything and thinks that they know where that's leading them. It makes any logical sense, which it completely doesn't in this program, right? Just the way that someone didn't raise a glass or said something random during some event is proof that they are untrustworthy. It's just hilarious to me.
I mean, I just don't think you can watch an episode without thinking, well, that's why so many women were burnt at the stake, or that's why the witch trials existed. Like it's just terrifying, that sort of just the madness of mobs, really, and like you say, almost the arrogance of thinking you can understand someone's character from the most innocuous of gestures. It scares the shit out of me, to be honest, and it does feel very of the moment.
I mean, I think but the positive is that watching that kind of unravel, I do think it's a really good exercise in seeing how every kind of, everything can have a positive and a negative meaning. It's entirely up to your decision whether you choose to read certain things in that light. So that someone saying, whatever the hell they said to one person is absolute proof that they must be a traitor. But equally, it's that, I mean, I see what you mean about the terror, because that person is going, no, that's completely proof that I'm not a traitor. And it just depends on how that mob decides to read it. But I think it's quite a good to watch it and see that unfold. It's quite a good education as to how wrong people can be, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, totally. I mean, I just think it's the best advertisement for like due process, and they're not rushing to judgment and all that sort of stuff. Like, there's that bit I think it's the second episode, where there's that lad Aaron who literally he doesn't go along with like the mob, right? And he's basically accused of being a traitor for almost like having, I don't know, almost that sort of singularity of thought. And I just find that that bit actually terrified me. That bit was like, no, hang on, he's literally being persecuted for being curious, and it's just, I don't know, it's just
Oh
boring.
yeah, for asking too many questions. Why do you keep asking me questions? Like, it's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, totally. It's just that thing where you're like, okay, well, that's why communism goes wrong, and that's why, which is a lot to get from a primetime BBC TV show.
Oh, well, wait till you get further in, it gets a lot worse.
God, okay. Well, maybe it's worth doing an episode 2 at some point when I'm finished, where you can dissect it further. Let's talk about your book. So it's the best book I've read this year.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to get too carried away. I haven't read loads of books this year, but it's really good. Well, it's really good. I've told you this. But was it a shock to you that it was so well received?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I feel, look, I knew it wasn't shit, but I just thought it would not be to most people's taste. I worried quite a lot about, there's some difficult subjects in there, and I treat them in a very particular way. I treat them in the way that I think, and that doesn't really conform, I think, to a lot of other people's thinking, certainly not from what I've seen out there. And so I was surprised that I didn't get more crap for that, actually. I mean, I may yet do. You never know. But, even talking about, things like abuse, the way my parents were, that I don't sit there and completely condemn them, and I think I've had quite a few people sort of, struggle a bit with the way I talk my parents. So they will go, oh, it's so lovely that you talk about your dad with real love, but, he was really neglectful and he was terrible as a parent. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I get that, I can see that that's certainly not the way that I would want to parent. But I do think that there is good in like kind of every situation. I got a lot out of being my father's daughter, a lot, right?
Yeah.
That I might not have got from a better parent, but a less interesting and maverick human being. And, to me, that's almost the whole story of the book. There are some crazy characters in there. Everybody is flawed in that book, everyone, including myself. And possibly the point of that is that judging people, funnily enough, in the same way as they do in Traitors, good people, bad people, end of, that to me just is completely nonsensical. So, I have had people who say, God, you really trash Emma, don't you? But then I get other people who go, like, well, that's bands, isn't it? Bands bicker. You're describing a female relationship that's very close and has a lot of conflict, which lots of women will be able to relate to.
Yeah.
And other people who actually knew me and Emma at the time say, God, I actually think you went quite easy on her. So and gave her a lot of praise. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm gonna come to Emma in a minute, but I think that one of the things that I found really refreshing about the book, I mean, we've talked about this endlessly on text messages, a little bit sort of how the sausage is made, kind of over the last couple of months. But I've talked a lot about how one of the things I really dislike about the moment that we're in is how almost kind of binary, kind of almost it feels like people's kind of psychology has become like people are good or they're bad, or people make mistakes, or all that stuff we've talked about, kind of cancel culture, all that stuff. And like one of the things I really like about the book is there's just tons of nuance in it. Like, and do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why it's been so well received? It's actually people are craving that.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that different people seem to relate to different parts of that book. There are people who have been through sort of similar kinds of, trauma or whatever, who relate to, that aspect of it. There are people who are, in bands themselves, and find it refreshing that someone describes what I would argue is every band's experience. They just never ever mention it because they're preserving the image of their band, which I understand. I think that I mean, you know, it pleases me that it resonates on many levels. Lots of people find it just a kind of real page turner, you know, that they find it quite novelistic, that there's characters that you want to find out what happens to them, and there's a protagonist that is going through a journey, and that's the thing that they attach to, you know.
I mean,
So I don't know, kind of have to ask them, really, don't you?
I mean, it's just one of those. It's one of those journalist questions, isn't it? Where it's like, I've got a theory about it, so therefore I'll project it onto you. I mean, I just think it's more, you know. I mean, Lush were a popular band of the era that maintain a lot of affection. So there is obviously interest in the book because of that. But I just think that it's kind of more than that, really. You know, like it isn't just pick this up and hear some stories about, you know, Top of the Pops or, you know, Britpop or whatever. It's more kind of like, it's more sort of like a sort of character piece, really, you know, which I think is what's really interesting about it. Like, I think you could read it if you had, you know, if you never bought a Lush record. So.
Oh, and it was written that way, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, partly because I just never thought that Lush was, you know, it's quite liberating in a way because Lush weren't never that massive. Yes, of course, there's a load of fans, but most people don't know who Lush are, which means I don't have to, you know, talk about certain landmarks that other bands would be stuck with. You know, I don't have to mention things that have become part of some cultural history. I can just talk about the bits I want to talk about. And a lot of the stuff, you know, I wrote about Lollapalooza. I wrote about two other tours as well, which just ended up getting cut because I just thought, well, one tour is like any other, really. You know, there's a couple of interesting anecdotes in the other one, but who cares, really? There was a whole kind of Glastonbury meltdown where I got completely off my face, but I thought, well, you know, you can read any rock and roll book and find some drug stories, really. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a bit boring. So I actually wanted to write it for people who weren't necessarily that knowledgeable about the music industry, certainly might never have heard of Lush. And it's partly why I explained a lot about, you know, what it's the brilliance of getting your own sound man, how money is divided up and how many problems that can cause, you know, how, you know, the press market you and how problematic that can be, you know, how record companies work, all of those things, you know, which unless you're on the inside, you don't really know. And most people don't talk about because it kind of seems to, I guess they feel that it, you know, kind of erases some of the magic. I'm not really interested in the magic, you know.
Yeah, no, totally. Do you think, you know, given that at various times you did go through the ringer, like a lot of musicians of that era, and of course now, and especially a lot of women, was it hard not to settle scores? Because I don't think that's how it reads. But was it hard not to go, you know what, I'm not happy about this, or this upset me. I can immortalize it now. I can put it onto paper.
I think what I found, I'm not going to lie, when I started out writing it, there was an element of like, great, I can, you know, blow the lid off this thing and blah, blah, blah. But the problem is, you know, what I found was you can start thinking that way, but then very quick on those heels comes your own bad behavior. And I think unless you put that in as well, it's a false picture of it. There are, you know, whether I'm talking about, you know, blokes that I went out with who's, you know, when I was very young and they were a bit older and I didn't like how they treated me, you know, I have to balance that. You know, I wasn't forced to go out with them. It's not like I was, you know, I got a lot out of those relationships, even if they were quite shit in the end. And I think that sort of pointing the finger at all sorts of other people without recognizing your own role in it, it's just not very helpful, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and sorry to use that awful word, but it's actually more empowering if you can sort of recognize your own sort of role in having, you know, entered into certain situations or allowed certain things to happen, so you just don't do them again, you know, and that you can point that out to other people and hopefully that they recognize that in themselves as well. I just think blaming people doesn't really get you very far.
No, absolutely. I think that's why we have ended up in this kind of maelstrom of victimhood and mass misery, is because, it's become that everything that happens to us is someone else's problem when it's often more complicated than that. But I guess this is the big question. Like, obviously, like with Emma, like Emma's like a very prominent character in it, of course. And was there at any point with you being like childhood friends, like you've come a long way with her? Was there any point where you thought this is a long, because this is maybe the end of the journey together, right?
I mean, we haven't spoken in about 5 years, so that journey ended a while ago. I think that you get thrust together with people when you're young and you're at school and you make friends, and then because we then had the fanzine and then we had the band, it's like, I assume it's like going out with someone and getting married when you're 17, and then by the time you're 40, you sort of think, I'm not sure I picked the right person to marry. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's no slight on her or me. I just think that you become different people, you grow in different ways, and the relationship no longer works for a multitude of reasons. I think we were under huge amounts of pressure to, from the outside. That applies for all bands who get any kind of level of success. And we didn't really survive it very well. I think we sniped at each other and we rubbed each other up the wrong way, and we didn't really know how to sort of solve all of that. So we kind of, avoided the conflict, and all of it just simmered, in the background until it would just explode out. And then there was kind of no coming back from that.
Yeah. Did you at any point think, well, this is now, obviously, like that reunion, 2015, 2016 was quite short lived, but when you wrote the book and put it out, did you think, well, that is the end of Lush now?
No, not really, because I always eternally live in hope. I've kind of funny enough, with the book, I reconnected with quite a lot of people I hadn't spoken to in a while. And time passes, and you realize that a lot of your kind of ideas about those people were maybe in the moment. Having said that, there's other people who have completely proved themselves to be exactly how I thought of them, and I thought, okay, well, that was the right decision.
Yeah.
I think I never expected Emma to have a particularly great response to the book. I understand. I know that if it was the other way around and Phil or Emma had written a book and I saw myself portrayed in a way that, I would think, well, you haven't spoken to me in 5 years, so therefore you're going to write something really shitty about me. And it's quite hard to shake that and be objective and look at that book and think anything other than that when you're the subject and you're having your sort of personality revealed.
Yeah.
You're not going to, she's never going to agree with my take on why that relationship went wrong, like in a marriage. I think she should write her own book, and then, maybe I'll get to understand what exactly she thinks went wrong, looking at me. But I think that's a lot of the problem. I don't think we ever really understood each other's perspectives. We didn't really discuss them because they were so opposite, and having those differences of opinion felt like a betrayal to either one. It's like, do you know what I mean? If she described, I think it's there throughout the book, whether it's, there are times when she is actually completely right, when she doesn't take any shit. She's like, no, I'm not fucking doing that. He's a arsehole, and is very confrontational with that person. And there are times when I'm thinking, okay, I think that's a bit much, but someone had to fucking say something. Otherwise, I'd have just sat there and taken it forever. So it was good that she did that. But equally, there were times when I would be more tolerant and she would get incredibly frustrated with me. And I feel that I was actually right.
Do you think, do you still care about her?
Of course I care about her. We have a shared history. There's a person that I spent a huge part of my life with.
Yeah.
I've had people kind of, particularly online, which is obviously not a great indicator, but people who have kind of slagged me off and said, oh my God, at the end of the book, she's sort of saying, oh, I miss Emma because of our shared history. And yet she spent the whole book like trashing her. I mean, I just don't agree with that. I haven't been point scoring. I think I've described the relationship as best as I could. And I don't, while I realize that that makes it infinitely harder for us to ever be friends again, it is, I was writing a book. I kind of had to write that. So I do understand that she certainly may feel, well, I'm never going to speak to you again. Obviously, I'm the person who wrote the book. So I, don't really have anything to forgive.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to always be more kind of like, well, hey, if she wanted to meet up and talk about it, I'd be perfectly fine with that. But I don't know how I would feel if I was on the receiving end, to be perfectly honest. So, yes, I have a fondness for Emma, for the shared history that we have and the adventures that we had together. That will always be a part of my makeup and my life and who I am, because we went through those things together. And as I said, all of those memories are made less vivid because she's not there to sit there and laugh about them with me, or remind me of her side of it, or any of those things. So of course that's a loss.
It's kind of weird as well that it's almost by doing this, I mean, it's like Lush's profile is a lot bigger again. It's kind of weird, like almost like maybe this is the thing that is, that it would be hard to get on stage together again, but at the same time, more people are interested in Lush than perhaps they have been in a long time.
Well, yeah, and I think that that benefits all of us. I mean, I think for a large part, certainly when I've seen books that have been written about, Britpop and all of that kind of stuff before I wrote this book, Lush were never even mentioned. I would challenge most people to find any other kind of record of Emma being celebrated as a very key songwriter of her era anywhere else than in my book, actually.
Yeah.
So, of course, that is, a land, it puts Lush a bit on the map, back where we belong, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, no, I mean, 100%, no, I guess without saying, but I think also as well, I don't think you would, I think there's lots of ways to express how things and people mattered to you, like if that relationship with Emma didn't matter, you wouldn't write about it. Do you know what I mean? Because you'd just be like, oh well, whatever. But there's something in that. It's like when people argue or people row, like they do so because it matters to them in some way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, completely. It's the people who can hurt you because you care about them. I mean, actually, I can't remember, someone last night actually was talking about, I don't know what writer it was, but who was sort of talking about the characters, and it might have been fiction, but they said even the bad characters, like you have to love them for them to come to life in a book.
Yeah.
And, I just, even with a character like Nora, my grandmother, who was largely just an appalling presence, but also, I do say I only knew her when she was old, and I don't know what she was like as a young woman, and I think, so again, last night someone said, God, it was remarkable. There's 2 photos of Nora in the kind of, the photo pages, and one is of her as a younger woman when I just didn't know her, in some cafe in Budapest, and the other is the Nora I knew, and you can see the change in her face, this sort of grim, determinedly unhappy woman, who's just this poisonous presence. But I think all the characters who are flawed and who I describe maybe doing terrible things, I don't think of anyone as evil. I genuinely think that there are people that, you probably have people in your life that you think that was a terrible person that I met. Well, there's going to be other people who think they're fucking amazing, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that
yeah,
they're a really
totally.
good friend and they're a lovely person. And I just think it's the mix that sometimes isn't right.
Yeah,
It's not, you
absolutely. Yeah,
can't condemn that person as being all round awful because once 10 years ago, when you knew them for like a month, they did a shitty thing to you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I've had, and it is how people choose to read that book. I've had people sort of come up to me and mention particular names in the book and go, oh my God, he's a real wanker, isn't he? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I had 2 encounters with them and they were like an arsehole to me, but they're probably fucking delightful to other people.
Hey, listen, all of my best friends are people who I, when I first met, I went, I'm not sure about you. It's kind of
Hmm.
really, it's almost become a bit of a running joke, really. Like, if I meet someone and I'm kind of a little bit like, oh God, inevitably I'm going to end up sort of being like soul brothers with them in a couple of years' time. So, tell me, I mean, on that note, I guess the thing that was really hard to read and I presume to write was the Chris stuff.
Hmm.
How did you approach that?
Um, I mean, I think, interestingly, on like social media, there's a kind of, every time his birthday rolls around or the date of his suicide, I even felt then it's like I tend to post on his birthday rather than when he died. And I have a real problem with only remembering someone who was such a vibrant and brilliant character as Chris by their death. It just reduces him down to this sort of tragic story, which is completely the wrong way to weight it.
Yeah,
Um, and so I really did want to kind of make sure that he resonated in those pages as the kind of funny and lovely person that he was, and not flawless, not this perfect person who I'm going to kind of sanctify, but just the normal lad,
yeah, 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 yeah.
because that's what he was. So the emphasis was all on that. And I actually thought, I'm not even going to think about the suicide and the all of that until I get to that point. Like, I don't want to sort of foreshadow it. Um, and I could do that because I have diaries. So there's something about having all those resources and being able to look at diaries where they immerse you in the moment. And that's kind of, I wrote the book in the present tense because that's how I wanted it to feel. You're in the moment, and it's whatever comes later doesn't necessarily affect what comes before because it hasn't happened yet. you
Yeah,
know
yeah, of course, yeah.
and
Yeah,
so when I came to write about his death, i think that I again described it kind of as it happened. It was so rapid, it was such a shock, and it it wasn't like I didn't see the signs. No one saw the signs. I don't know if that's because we lived in a different time and we didn't know how to look out for them. But, you know, when I had to write that last chapter, which I wrote about a lot, right? I wrote many, many different versions and thought, no, too much, too much, too much. And I did want to almost get that impact of how it affected everybody because it was a real shock. And I think, it was really hard. I spent about a week writing about it, and every time Moose came home and would find me in front of the computer just sobbing my fucking eyes out, because it was hard to go back to that time and remember that loss.
I think when someone takes their life, I mean, obviously, it's like when someone takes their life, it's like, I mean, it's sort of no. I would say in like 99% of cases, it's kind of beyond comprehension, and it's so hard to see it come in, and it leaves so many questions with yourself. Um, I guess that I'm writing my book at the moment, and there are definitely difficult things I've written about where I've learned something. Do you think that by writing about it, any of those questions have been answered?
Yes, I mean, I think that delving back into it, after Chris died, I mean, the number of conversations, the number of I still get asked, why do you think he did it? And, you talk through all those things. Everybody has their theories. I even had people going, oh, do you think it's like some deep, dark secret in his family and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I can absolutely fucking it's interesting that people want to find a reason. They want to find possibly someone to blame for that. Was it the doctors who prescribed him the antidepressants and didn't take enough care to sort of follow up that care? Was it his parents, or was there something in his environment that caused that? No, I genuinely don't think so. I just think he went through this terrible tunnel. I would argue that the rifeness of drugs around the time of Britpop didn't fucking help.
Yeah.
I do think that he was reaching a watershed moment where he was turning 30. The band was clearly never going to become, we were never going to become U2 and make a sort of, millionaire's career out of it. And I think those were difficult sort of things for him to manage, and coupled with the fact that he wasn't someone who really opened up and talked about those things. But ultimately, I think that the notion that he was just overwhelmed by a despair that he just couldn't find a way out of was a new thing that I thought and could empathize with, going back and looking at it, because now I'm older and I do know people who have had, depression or have gone through phases where despair has been overwhelming. And I know how awful it is to be trapped in that. And I do think that Chris is such a positive person who could solve all his problems by, going up to the Lake District and going for a nice long walk, and would be completely regenerated by that.
Yeah.
When those things didn't work anymore, I can only, that's the only thing I can feel. But it actually makes me, rather than sort of analytically trying to find a reason, it's something that I can actually empathize with. And I think that was quite new in writing the book.
I think the way you write about him is beautiful. It kind of puts a bit of life back into him, doesn't it?
I hope so. And it does touch me when people who knew him, who were friends of his from when he was younger, do say, oh, you brought him to life in those pages. So that's really important for me.
One of the things I find dead interesting about your journey is that you, like, when Chris dies and when the band calls it a day, like, you vanish for. I mean, not so much for me, because I'm working in the same building as you, and everyone's going, "Oh, Miki from Lush, he works on that floor," and I'm like a Britpop nerd, and I'm like, "Oh God, I hope I get to meet her in the lift." But like normal people, you vanish for 2 decades or whatever. During that time, could you ever have imagined writing a book like this?
No, absolutely not. I mean, not at least because I thought, well, who the fuck would be interested?
So was it was it that reunion that maybe reminded you or showed or maybe made you think, oh, people would be interested in this?
No, because it was only when I was approached in I think it might have been August of 2019, I think, that the Peter Selby, who was setting up 9/8 Books, approached me and suggested it. And I literally just laughed and was like, well, that's completely ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. So,
Right.
But it took a while for it to sort of germinate and for me to think, okay, maybe I could do this. I mean, not least losing my job and then lockdowns. I mean, there were other factors where I thought,
Yeah.
okay, maybe I should give this a go. But also, I think the landscape has really changed. I genuinely think if I'd have written that book in 1996, it would have been dismissed, because I think people would have gone like, well, who the fuck cares about Lush? I think they would have actually said that. And I do think things have changed in that, women's stories and an alternative viewpoint of events is now much more welcomed and tolerated. I do think that, Viv Albertine writing her book. I mean, I can remember reading that book quite early on, the close, boys, boys, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And quite a few people around me were like, oh, I started reading it, but she just sounds like such an awful person. I just couldn't carry on with it. Or they didn't like her voice and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because that's actually why I really like it, is that she doesn't try to be this, lovely person. It's not, she's just, she's fucking really putting herself on the page there.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, I want to hear more. And I loved all her take of like, because I just thought, oh, do I really need to read yet another take on the punk rock time where everybody colludes and agrees on who was great and who was awful and slags each other off? And I rather like the fact that she said, actually, I always really got on with Malcolm McLaren. I thought he was a really nice person.
Yeah.
I might not agree with that, but I thought it was great that she was offering a completely different, watching Mick Jones or reading about Mick Jones, and for him to become this very different person, this quite, decent guy who she relied on a lot, their love affair. I think Sid Vicious is this kind of very vulnerable,
Yeah.
quite childish person.
That
was
book
lovely.
really, that for this kind of, everyone's, there's literally thought pieces now about, what a great time it is for music books. And I think that book, like Viv's book, is almost kind of the year zero for all that stuff, really. I think it sort of changed the game.
Yeah, and I found it, very inspiring. I did, it was one of the things that made me want to do the reunion, because she was sort of just going on about, I'm just going to have a year where I say yes to everything. And so, I just think it was I think that in writing my book, I really enjoyed like Tracy Thorn's book as well, because I think she has just a really lovely style that makes me, just wallow in her kind of, narrative style. And I'm not a big fan of Everything But the Girl, you know what I mean? I like some of the music that she's done, but I'm not a huge fan. I thought the book she wrote about Lindy Morrison was fucking brilliant, and I don't know an awful lot about the Go-Betweens either.
Right.
But she has kind of real humanity and warmth with the way that she writes. And I think that, I don't want to sit here and go like how men write and how women write and all of that. What I like is that experience of being in a music industry as a woman actually is different. I'm sorry, however sensitive you are as a man, you're just not going to experience it that way. And so it's really refreshing to read that. It's not a challenge. It's not to say that, all those male writers are wrong and that their version of it is bollocks. It's not. And I think that now we live in a time where there is more room allowed for that. Different voices describing the same thing, and throwing different light on it, which I think that is actually the way that writing about history works. It's just that music seemed to be dominated by a need to have this single voice, and any kind of detraction from that would be leapt on and criticised and taken personally. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, as someone that, to whatever degree within the music press kind of help form narratives, one of the things I always found unbelievably frustrating, this isn't supposed to kind of, this isn't supposed to be me blowing my own trumpet, but one of the things I often found so difficult about like editorial meetings is it was like there was a narrative of how almost like how kind of pop music developed, and there would be so many important people who would be like left on the wayside. So you'd be like talking about the 60s, for example, and it was the same names, and it was always boys in bands, and you'd be like, well, at what point do the Shangri-Las like figure in this, or these kind of like forgotten people? But I think that also it's easy for me to say that as I'm not trying to be like kind of not all men about that as well, because it was still men kind of arguing about this. Do you know what I mean? In offices in music magazines. So I do think it is really amazing that there are there are so many voices that are not that now. I think that's a brilliant thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I can see the trap, and I also get why people want to read books about their favorite band that say how amazing that band is and how much the band love each other and how brilliant it was every fucking step of the way. And have this rock and roll myth that they want to kind of, I don't know, vicariously dip into and enjoy the fantasy. And I'm not even knocking that, go for it. I can see why that's very appealing to a lot of people. I just find it really boring personally, because when I read it, I can see all the cracks in it where I think, well, that's not really how it happened, is it? And therefore it yeah, it just doesn't engage me, I suppose. you know.
Yeah, totally. There's so many things about there's so many things about this kind of quote unquote progressive time, right? That like I don't think are progressive at all. But I absolutely love that there is more space for different voices. Whether that's women, whether that's people of different genders, whether that's people, who have mental health stuff, or people of color or whatever. I do think that thing is amazing, that it isn't just the same stories being told. So, I presume now you have won loads of awards and topped loads of charts. There are going to be people who want you to do another book. Are you going to do another book?
I would love to, but I need to think about what I would do. I am sort of actually quite cautious about things, and I'd certainly tend not to talk about them until I'm actually almost on the verge of having finished something.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
was like that about the book. I kept it very, very quiet, and I think about five people knew, and you know, because actually this is a bit of a side thing, but I do wonder sometimes, like I do know, I've seen people on social media who keep posting about, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm writing a film, and I'm doing this, and they're kind of talking about stuff that they haven't fucking done yet,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And sort of putting, like, I don't know, author in their little biog when they haven't actually fucking written anything yet.
yeah.
And to me, that is such a terrible idea. I mean, for me, that would be so crushing. um it would just panic me, and I do wonder whether, oh, that's a tactic, because once they've announced that, they really have to do it, and it's a galvanizing and a driving force. It has the opposite effect on me. It just drowns me in self-doubt and panic, and who the fuck do you think you are? So until I've actually done it, and then I can say, okay, I've done it, now I can talk about it, now I can say it. That is the way I work. So I think in terms of writing another book, I would love to. I'm very kind of, it gives me confidence that a lot of people talk about the writing itself rather than just the context and how they engaged with that. And, that kind of, lots of people saying that it was a page turner, and so that sort of side of it makes me think, okay, well, that's a transferable skill. I could actually write about something else, but I need to find something that I want to write about that would
That matters to you.
that matters to me, but also where I would feel confident enough. Lots of people have talked about writing fiction, but fuck me, that's a whole other world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I'd
yeah,
have to sort of think about that a lot.
yeah. I can't think of an amazing track record for musicians writing fiction either. I don't really know why that is, but I'm really struggling to think of many musicians who've written novels that I love.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
By the way, I'm absolutely one of those people who says what they're doing before they do it, because I cannot do it otherwise. I don't know
Yeah,
what, but I think that I think it for me. I mean, I think a bit of it is the OCD stuff of overthinking things, and I'm like, well, if I kind of publicly commit to something, then I'm going to have to do it. But I also think it's a kind of a confidence thing as well. Like it's kind of like I don't know. I mean, if I'm being completely transparent about it, I think sometimes I need people to say, "Oh, that'd be brilliant," that for me to be like, "Oh, okay, well, people are going to want this, so I'll do it." Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And maybe that therein lies the difference. Because I think if I go out there and say I'm going to do that, everyone will go, that's brilliant. And I just think, well, I don't really believe you. Like I think other people have more kind of faith in my abilities than I do myself.
Right.
So, and I don't even mean that in some glib and stupid.
You don't come across as unconfident.
I think, and I'm going to get a bit cod psychological here. I think that possibly that is down to my parents who did that, who were constantly loading me with these sort of, yes, you're so capable, yes, you're so that. And meanwhile, I was just crumbling and falling to pieces underneath it all. And so I think maybe a lot of the doubts I have about other people's faith in me in that respect is a bit linked to that, where I think you actually don't know what you're fucking talking about.
Right, yeah. My general view is I just think everyone's crumbling and falling to bits, but it's just about how you sort of fake it, really. Like I might be totally wrong. I mean, I have definitely met people where I'm like, you obviously know who you are and you're so assured. But generally speaking, I think that everyone's just fumbling through, but some people are better at hiding it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think also, having been in a band and been surrounded by people who just fucking big themselves up all the time, that might have had an effect as well, where I just find that deeply unattractive.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to go anywhere near it, actually. But yes, I mean, I think ultimately, like, when you describe, like, I have to talk about those things because it actually makes me need to do them. And I think I can totally understand how that I kind of need that, but I need it from about like 3 people, and then I don't want anyone else to know. So a lot of when I was writing the book, having my agent and my, publisher sort of feeding back and egging me on, and do you know what I mean? I definitely needed that.
Yeah.
But the thought of kind of talking about it to the outside world before it was ready, I'm sort of quite protective about those things, whether it's writing a song or making an album or starting up a band. I need it to just settle a bit and grow organically in a sort of protected space before I let it out there in the world.
Where can I only learned the other day that Lush covered Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep. Is that on YouTube?
I'm sure it's uploaded somewhere. Yeah, it must be.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a child of the 70s, right? So I'm like the kind of the 80s. But there's an episode of the podcast I did with Will Hodgkinson about like sing along 70s pop, and he just kept talking about Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep, and I was like, well, I need to know more about this. And then the other day I have got quite obsessed with it now. And the other day I was like, I wonder who's covered this. And I went on that site where it tells you who's done covers, and I was like, Lush, what the fuck? That's crazy. So no, I'm going to investigate that.
I think it was an anti-poll tax album called Alvin Lives in Leeds, and they basically got loads of bands to do, like, I think it was covers of number ones, like number one hits, I think.
Right.
And because I think we toyed with doing Yes Sir I Can Boogie. And so because me and Emma were the same age, and I think Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep was one of those sort of songs that we can all remember as, like, I don't know how old we would have been, 5, something like that. It's like a really, really early song that we would laugh about and go, yeah, I remember that song. And it was quite funny recording it with Robin Guthrie, because he was like, it's just quite funny doing a song like that and everybody taking it incredibly seriously, right, and genuinely trying to make it a lovely, beautiful Robin Guthrie Cocteau Twins guitars song.
Yeah, totally. What about the band now? Where are you at? What are you doing? Have you been too busy being a successful author to be writing songs?
I think because I've done a lot of these sort of events and promo things, and in some of them, I've been playing a bit of music with Moose and Ollie, and we've been doing little, some Lush songs and stuff. So I've been doing that for a bit. I need to write some music, and I'm a bit sort of I don't know. Again, it's all a bit nebulous. I don't know where those songs will land, whether I'll end up doing them with Moose and Ollie or whether they'll become Piroshka. I have to write the songs first and then see which way the wind is blowing for us, really.
I did you notice I said the new band because I never know how to say it properly and I didn't want to look stupid. I don't.
It's written how it sounds. I mean, it's actually I took it from the Hungarian, and in Hungarian, a single S without the H is the sh sound. But I thought if I don't put the H in, everyone's just going to call it Pyro Ska, or they're going to think we're a ska band or something. It's like, so I just did it phonetically.
Yeah, there's not much worse than people thinking you're a ska band. Shall we? I'm going to ask you this as well because it will force me to edit this before when I've got some free time tomorrow. What are you doing for Christmas?
I am just going to be at home. We have a very small family, so there's no rushing around the country or, grandparents and all of that kind of malarkey. So it's usually just, I picked up the bird today from the butcher in the pouring rain, which was quite good because there was no queue outside. So, yeah, Christmas dinner, all the trimmings. Probably, I might go. I was sort of saving up, signing up to Apple TV for like a month, so I could watch. What is it? Is it called Slow Horses or something?
It's very good.
People keep raving about it, so I thought that might be a good thing to kind of, lounge about to over the Christmas week.
Bad Sisters as well. That's the one.
Oh yes, that was who's the one in that? Sharon Horgan.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh yes, that was on my list as well. So yeah, I might do that.
Yeah, I'm really. I've sort of developed a real crush on Bono's sister. Not Bono's sister, Bono's daughter, which is not something I was expecting to ever say, because she's one of the sisters in it. So,
Okay.
I don't know why I put that out there actually, because my wife's reading your book at the moment, so I'm sure she will end up listening to this podcast. So I've just I fucked up. On that bombshell, shall we start recording and just talk a bit about life?
Yes, sure.
All right.